Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanika. He is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, about a dozen people have died in the Ukrainian city of Donetsk, a stronghold of pro-Russian separatists. The deaths occurred when a bus was hit by mortar shells this morning, just hours after a planned ceasefire. Pro-Ukrainian forces are implied in the attack, although it's too early to tell. A day before the attack, Ukraine had lost control of the airport in Donetsk to rebel forces. 2 days after President Obama accused Russia of being a bully in his State of the Union address, the Pentagon has just announced plans to send U.S. troops to Ukraine in order to, quote, assist Ukraine in strengthening its law enforcement capabilities, conduct internal defense, and maintain rule of law. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded saying, quote, the Americans have taken the course of confrontation and do not assess their own steps critically at all. The United States wants to dominate the world and not merely be first among equals. Well, Chenjerai, what do you make of what's happening right now? How serious is the situation? And could the situation between the Ukraine and Russia unravel now that the U.S. is sending troops?
Well, what we know for sure is that the U.S. interest in Ukraine is a tactical concern that's much more concerned with the politics of energy transit than it is with the well-being of the Ukrainian people. Essentially, the State Department has sponsored reports, one by the Woodrow Wilson Center, revealing its strategy of trying to challenge Russian hegemony in the region by supporting multiple pipeline routes. And Ukraine has a strategic position between energy producers in the Eurasian region and the consumers in the Eurasian region and, in the Caspian Sea. So basically, this is kind of what I think we have to look at behind some of the U.S. efforts to gain influence there. And yeah, I think that it's going to create some problems with stability in the region.
And we'll follow this story in the coming days. New Jersey police have just released a video of an incident that took place on December 30th of two officers confronting an African-American man in a car whom they shot dead. Jerame Reed was pulled over for a traffic stop, and after police found a gun in his glove compartment, things rapidly escalated, even though Mr. Reed did not have a gun on his person and seemed to be complying with his hands up. Meanwhile, the FBI has just announced that its investigation of the Mike Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri has concluded with no charges against Officer Darren Wilson. Just days ago, an incident that received little news coverage highlights the hypocrisy of police shootings of unarmed black men. A white gun enthusiast in Oklahoma named Dallas Horton shot a black police chief 4 times and simply walked away with no charges. Chief Lewis Ross would have been dead had he not been wearing a flak jacket. Horton is known through his Facebook posts to be a conservative who referred to Mike Brown as a, quote, thug and feared the spread of Sharia law in the U.S. Chenjerai, it's hard to be shocked anymore by police violence and the double standards that permeate our society, but are you shocked by these stories?
Well, if you see the Jerome Reed footage, it's absolutely shocking. And I think so many of the video stories that we see on these stories are really, they're deeply disturbing. And we know now that these are systemic problems. They're not anecdotal. In the fall, we had the ProPublica report that found that black men are 21 times more likely to be killed than white men during arrest. And, we have this many examples of white men who may shoot at police, and are able to be arrested without being killed and sometimes not even charged, or not even convicted when we know that they definitely shot police officers. So it's a real problem, and we can be thankful at least for the ongoing activism and the fact that this is now a part of the national conversation.
And finally, in what is being seen as a political embarrassment for the Republican Party, a bill calling for a federal abortion ban has died because many GOP members themselves found it too extreme. Introduced by Republicans in their first week as a majority party in Congress, the 20-week abortion ban was set to be debated in the House last night to coincide with a major anti-abortion annual march in Washington, D.C. on the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade. But the bill was quietly pulled after it was clear it would not receive enough votes from even within the GOP. Democrats, buoyed by the bill's failure, introduced their own pro-choice bill called the Women's Health Protection Act of 2015, intended to preserve access to reproductive health. Of course, given the Republican majority in both houses, there's no chance of its passage. Well, Chenjerai, does this bill's failure point to the limits of GOP extremism? I mean, at some point, they've got to realize that they've gone too far, and it seems as though that's what happened this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's deep contradictions in the GOP rhetoric about family values, and they really come out on issues like this, where you have uh, uh, female politicians in the GOP actually pushing back against this kind of extremism. I think this also shows the importance of activism. You know, we've had ongoing work by Planned Parenthood, by activist groups. There was a die-in yesterday, you know, in protest of this bill. So you see that these efforts do eventually have some impact on policy. But we should also keep our eyes open because the Republicans are pushing forward with a little bit more tricky bill to limit federal funding on abortion. So we need to keep our eye open and keep the pressure going on that.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Chenjerai, for joining us today. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is our daily newsflash guest expert on Thursdays. He's an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. We'll be right back after this break.